But I'm going to move on now to the story that is blowing up again. And I'm sick of this story because it really just is another example of the United States escalating the new Cold War with Russia this time. I usually talk about China, but with Russia and literally making things up out of whole cloth. It's just pathetic. So the United States now, Joe Biden administration, is once again claiming that Russia is eminently going to invade Ukraine. Weeks ago, right? I think it was a little over a week ago, we had President Zelensky of Ukraine, of the president of the puppet government of Ukraine, that is the product of a 2014 coup by the United States. For what it's worth, FYI, he has already said that the United States is the one that is propagandizing about war. He didn't put it in those terms, but he said that the United States is hyping war and that there is no invasion that is going to happen imminently. So we really do need to cool the jets. That's essentially what he said. Now, the United States media, the corporate media, and Joe Biden, the State Department, they don't even mention the Ukrainian president's name. He's kind of persona non grata because he is not going along with what really is, I think, a byproduct of so many problems that the United States is facing that we will get into. But I want to just share one story. I'm just going to share one corporate media report on this from today about the recent escalations over Ukraine. So let me do that. It's a CNN report where Biden says, I think you can see that now. Right. So Biden warns, man, there are just ads everywhere, huh? This is wild. It's awful. Um, so Biden warns Putin will react decisively and impose swift and severe costs if Russia invades Ukraine. So that is from today. So President Joe Biden warned Vladimir Putin, President of Russia, that the U.S. and its allies will respond decisively and impose swift and severe consequences on Russia should Putin decide to invade Ukraine. So they talked today. Putin and Biden spoke today. The White House said Biden made clear in this call that to Putin what he would be risking with an invasion. A senior administration official told reporters following the call that the discussion was substantive, but the U.S. fears Russia may still launch an attack anyway. Think about that. Russia has not invaded Ukraine once since the 2014 coup. Russia has supported the Donbass region in its struggle. It has reinstated or instated, I should say, Crimea, right after the 2014 referendum, right after the coup, where 90+% of people of Crimea said they want to be part of Russian Federation because they're Russian speaking and they didn't want to be lynched by far right fascist mobs, which is what a lot of the Ukrainian government was at that time and still is. That's what Russia has done, surely, right? So we have to put that into context and say, yeah, Russia has been involved in Ukraine. It just happens to be on Russia's border. It just happened. It used to be a much closer ally under Yanukovych before the coup. And there's still bilateral relations between Ukraine and Russia. But the United States has used Ukraine as one of the most important ships in this new Cold War, right? To install a far right government hostile to Russia right on the border, to empower far right groups that are extremely hostile to Russians, right? To Russian speaking people. That is very concerning. And then to threaten NATO membership, to say that NATO membership is being pursued. And now Joe Biden and his administration will always say, no, 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 it's not. We're not pursuing NATO membership, but Ukraine is free to decide, right? Well, actually, we know how close the Biden family is to this Ukraine coup. We know about the Hunter Biden situation. We know that Hunter Biden had a prominent board position where he was getting paid $50,000. What was that, per month or something? And that was a byproduct of the coup, right? The Obama administration produced that situation. And they started all of this through the coup and continued to bully Ukraine through the IMF, through military operations and so-called cooperation to be hostile and to dangle NATO membership in front of these puppet forces to say you can truly be one of us by joining NATO, and that's a huge threat to Russia. If Ukraine were to join NATO, what would happen, right? Ukraine would get even more military aid, even more weapons of mass destruction amassed on the Russian border. That's already happening. We know that $2.7 billion has been funneled to Ukraine I think in the last year alone in military aid. That is significant, and we can't forget that. So President Biden was clear that if Russia undertakes further invasion, right, further invasion of Ukraine, interesting language, the United States, together with our allies and partners, will respond decisively and impose swift and severe costs on Russia. President Biden reiterated that a further Russian invasion of Ukraine, further again, boom, 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 further, right? Russia has already invaded Ukraine, is the insinuation here. It would produce widespread human suffering and diminish Russia's standing, the White House said in a statement, adding Biden was, quote, clear with Putin that while the United States remains prepared to engage in diplomacy in full coordination with our allies and partners, we are already prepared for other scenarios. There you have it, folks. The United States is prepared for war. That's what it's saying. And now let's be honest, the United States is not prepared for war. The United States can't. If the United States were to go to war with Russia and start a global conflagration of this magnitude, the United States' capitalist economy, which is literally threadbare, literally, I mean, just literally on the verge of collapse via the most minor shifts in economic, political health and stability. To think that a global confrontation with Russia, which is what a war with Russia would be, it would pull in China, it would pull in Iran, it would pull in all of Europe, right? 40% of natural gas, of which is provided by Russia. It would create extreme pressures on a country like Germany with the Nord Stream pipeline. I mean, all of these huge pressures that would be placed on the whole world based on a confrontation with Russia led by the United States would be disastrous, right? So, wow, these ads. So, this is absolutely just damning. This just shows through the language further Russian invasion, further. I'm sure what they're referring to is that Russia has been amassing troops, meaning that within Russia, they have been preparing for what I think they think, what Russia thinks would be some kind of first move, some kind of proxy attack on the border, which would require Russia to respond, right? Really, what Russia's doing is preparing to defend itself. But that's not how it is framed. Russia has already sent Vladimir Putin, Russia has already sent, the Russian Federation has sent both to Ukraine and the United States and to NATO, I believe, its demands, which is just please stop pressuring NATO membership, stop thinking about it, stop it. Stop the NATO membership threat, stop the military escalations. We'll all stop and we will all then negotiate diplomatically under conditions where diplomacy is possible. Because right now, this kind of language, diplomacy is not possible. We have to be honest about that. The diplomacy is not possible when you are literally saying that you are prepared for war and literally sending military weaponry to Ukraine and literally claiming that Russia has already invaded Ukraine. You've actually painted the entire scenario for a US led war. Through all of that, you've actually painted a picture where the US has a basis to wage war now on Russia in saying that somehow you are ready for diplomacy. This is how the United States does things. It's completely and utterly reactionary. It is utterly imperialist, and it is so utterly dangerous. But this is the state of the United States, this imperialist system right now. This is the state of the war machine. This is what the military contractors want. This is what the donor class wants. This is what Wall Street wants. They want more markets. They want to open up the military industrial complex to more markets. And so that means you have to have national security, quote unquote, threats. And that's what they're trying to generate through NATO, which is ironic because NATO actually is not a national security, quote unquote, threat to the United States. It's an alliance that has actually well outlasted its usefulness, given that it was organized to counter the Soviet Union. One comment on that, because people say this, oh, NATO should have disbanded because they promised Gorbachev, the United States promised Gorbachev not to expand eastward further if the Soviet Union would meet their demands and if they would liberalize, et cetera, et cetera. And oh, the Soviet Union fell. And so that's just shows that NATO has no longer has a purpose. That's always so naive to think that an institution like NATO follows any kind of international law or legalities or diplomacy, some kind of agreements. No, NATO was formulated in response to the Soviet Union in the specific sense, in the concrete sense. But in the broad sense, NATO was a response to the socialist movement, to the world socialist movement. It was about uniting capitalist countries militarily under the leadership of the United States, which had become the imperialist power, which had become the foremost imperialist power. It was really a way for the United States to express its newfound economic supremacy through military means and attempt to contain the world socialist movement, which was burgeoning at that time. You had the Soviet Union, you had China, you had Korea, you had Cuba, you had so many countries that were on fire, that were struggling for socialism, and NATO was one way to keep the European side, the Eurasian side of the continent in check. And that's what NATO is all about. And NATO actually continues to have that purpose, even under different conditions. Even Russia's semblance of sovereignty, expression of sovereignty is a problem, right? And that's why NATO has actually been creeping and creeping further because after shock therapy and after Russia was literally plunged into the dark ages economically, you had life expectancy drop by more than 10 years for the entire population. For men, it was nearly like 20 years. It was something incredibly devastating, right? Between 1991 to 99. And after that, Russia started to implement some reforms to sort of restabilize things under the leadership of Vladimir Putin, and that has been seen as a threat. Not to mention how things geopolitically have changed since the global war on terror and how that has created this permanent crisis for the United States and opened up room for Russia to be more independent in terms of its foreign policy, to be able to make alliances with countries like China, to be able to assert itself in a way that is independent of the United States. That is what this is really all about. Ukraine is just a flashpoint for this. And so we have to remember that Ukraine is just a flashpoint for all of this. So to continue, the call between the two leaders comes hours after the U.S. moved some of its forces out of Ukraine and ordered the evacuation of most of its embassy staff on Saturday as fears mount that a Russian invasion of the country could take place in the next few days. The moves are yet another sign that the U.S. fears Putin could order an invasion at any time, just one day after Biden's national security advisor warned Americans in Ukraine to leave and that military action could begin with an aerial bombardment that would kill civilians, or that could kill civilians. So that's how the United States does things, right? This is similar to Syria, although there wasn't any embassy being emptied in Syria, but that's how the United States planned to begin a war with Syria. So this is very dangerous. That's in 2013, if you remember the red line by Obama. He was pressured to not take that step, but that's what was going to happen. A senior administration official told reporters Saturday afternoon that the call between the two presidents was professional and substantive, but there was no fundamental change in the dynamic that has been unfolding now for several weeks. The two presidents agreed that our teams will stay engaged in the days ahead, the official told reporters after the call. Russia may decide to proceed with military action anyway. Indeed, that is a distinct possibility. So I don't really want to go through any more of this. Actually, let's skip over to, that's the real escalation that happened today. Let's move on to all eyes on Ukraine. I'm curious about what CNN says because this is kind of the context and I can see if there's any corrections needed. So the US has estimated that Russia has more than 100,000 troops near the Ukraine border. So 100,000 troops in Russia. Shocking. With thousands added this week, according to the administration official. It's always unnamed officials, right? Really intelligence. This is what they mean. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told reporters on Friday that a Russian assault on Ukraine could begin soon, beginning with aerial bombings and missile attacks. He advised all Americans to leave, blah, blah, blah. We cannot predict the future. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. Then why? This is so funny. But the risk is high enough and the threat is now immediate enough that this is what prudence demands. So, Mayor Vitaly, this is small for me. So, Klitschko outlined preparations the city is taking to safeguard critical and social infrastructure facilities in the event of a possible emergency. So obviously, there's some. So Klitschko said our efforts aimed at preventing overarching over or overcoming both possible provocations and withstanding military attacks. So obviously, the United States has some friends in the Ukrainian government and the local government of Kiev. The senior administration official on Saturday said that the U.S. will continue and even increase its support for Ukraine. So there we go. There's the open market, baby. Will continue and even increase its support for Ukraine. So $2.7 billion isn't enough, right? It isn't enough. There's going to be more military aid sent to Ukraine. This is a big part of it. This is the military industrial complex. This is how war profiteering is done. And I believe that's a big pressure here. That's a big pressure point here. As our plans going forward, as to our plans going forward, I think President Biden and other officials have been clear that Russia should Russia continue down the path of escalation, the U.S. will continue to increase our support for Ukraine to enable it to defend itself. And that approach has not changed. So that's what is happening. All right, I'm just going to end this screen share. That's what's happening. There isn't really that much substance there, guys. This is what's incredible about this. There isn't that much substance to any of these stories. And why is that? Because everything they're saying is a lie. It's a lie. It's literally a lie to lead us into war. Where have we heard lies before by the United States to lead us into war? Oh, I don't know. 2003, the invasion of Iraq, or 2002, I should say, weapons of mass destruction. They led to that vote, which Biden happily voted for at that time. Heard it before, weapons of mass destruction. We heard it before that, incubator babies, sanctions on children, right? It was worth it. That's what Madeleine Albright said. This is the same mentality. Same mentality. 500,000 Iraqi children dead because of US sanctions was worth it. This is that mentality. This is all worth it because we're defending Ukraine. The United States is defending Ukraine. It's not defending Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't need the United States to defend it. Why? Well, the United States staged a coup in 2014, a really violent coup, one that empowered some of the most fascistic forces on the planet, right? When we were going to China, my wife is Jewish, Russian Jewish, but many generations down. So we were looking for flights to get to China. And of course, usually you have to stop somewhere if you're going to get a flight that is more affordable. So this was back in 2018. We were looking for this before our 2019 trip. And one of the landing spots was Kiev. I can tell you, we were not looking to go there because of what happened in 2014 and because of everything that happened afterward, right? Because the far right politics in Ukraine are just like Hungary, just like a lot of these Eastern European countries, Poland, right, that have far right governments. Why? Because the United States has wielded its influence to the degree after the fall of the Soviet Union to shape the politics of that region. So to continue this policy of containing Russia, this new Cold War. That's why the politics of Ukraine are so divided, are so unstable. That's why the United States is calling the shots and not Ukraine. This is a huge problem. And not many people talk about this, right? This broader agenda. Why? Why? Well, the United States is trying to choke Russia. It's trying to strangle Russia militarily. It's trying to, I believe, do there's a big new Brzezinski model for the 21st century, which is try to admit every single Eastern European country, every single country bordering Russia into NATO and create such a massive potential threat that Russia feels the need to invest more militarily and potentially make a mistake to bring it into war, to collapse its society, and hopefully overthrow the government. That's the plan because the United States isn't all of this stuff. Oh, Russia's going to create a airstrike, all of this in Ukraine. It's nonsense. It's not going to happen. It's all intelligence lies. What the United States really wants is Russia to feel compelled to do that. So it has more opportunities to justify NATO admission for Ukraine and further sanctions on Russia to squeeze Russia and to try to overthrow the government there. And so, luckily, we do have more people. Unlike China, we do have more people who speak out about Russia. Even Tulsi Gabbard, who to me is so discredited at this point, but Tulsi Gabbard came out with a statement about it. There's a lot of people who will defend Russia, which is great, but it's not really in the movement, right? Not really in the movement. And that's because we do have this liberal hysteria. We do have social democratic hysteria. We do have even people who call themselves socialists who are anti Russian hysterics. They cannot seem to get this Cold War thinking out of their head, and they believe that Russia is like the second coming of the Soviet Union, and that Putin is the second coming of the KGB, and that it's like the most oppressive and dictatorial place that there is on the planet, or one of them. It's a strong man, yada yada yada. So it doesn't deserve. They don't deserve support. Russia doesn't deserve support, and that's the situation. So that's where we're at in terms of Ukraine, and so the United States is looking to wage war there. And that doesn't mean that the United States is going to start dropping bombs tomorrow. What that means is that there is a geopolitical game plan here. There's a chess match going on, and the United States is trying to set fire to the board, meaning that it will literally do anything possible within the realm of possibility, which I don't even think dropping bombs on Ukraine, right? Or trying to provoke Russia into doing that as well is really the strategy here. I think the strategy here is creating a political situation through military provocations that will lead to more sanctions and that will lead to a more fertile political environment for further NATO encroachment.